So let me ask this, right? Because we know that these conversations can go for hours, right? I've seen so many YouTubes about secret societies and stuff like that. And you can have a 5-hour conversation about this stuff without bringing up one Bible verse. But for an individual like me, right? So my calibration is as such, right? I'm going to start off with the text and then I'm going to build whatever my disposition is from there. And if I don't have very specific language to attach my disposition to, I keep it in mind, right? But I'm very hesitant to bring it up in conjunction with scripture, right? And so when people are saying things like, well, you know, is America Babylon, or Freemasons or Jesuits and stuff like that, for someone such as myself, the moment you say Babylon, I'm going to go get my Bible app. I'm going to type Babylon in, and whatever verses pop up, I'm going to see the likelihood or how much of what you've said seems to coincide with what I'm reading, right? Now, when we're talking about the Babylon in Revelation, what is it in there that makes you feel that America might potentially be Babylon the Great? Like, what is there any language in Revelation that makes you feel that, or is it anywhere scripturally that kind of causes you to make that connection?
Who are you addressing the question to?
To the whole family, but
okay. I don't. So I'm bow out of this answer.
Okay, so with Jason, I would agree that there's likely some really scary stuff going on with the secret societies, but as far as the how would you put it, what connection that has with Babylon the Great in Revelation, we still have all our work ahead of us because we have to figure out what's causing us to make that connection. So is there anything that you personally have seen that causes you to do that? You or Mike?
All right. Well, as far as Bible verses, I'm not the guy for that. I have read Revelation, but I'm not somebody who can quote verse and all that. So maybe Sean can interject because I know he knows that stuff. But I can tell you that the people who are behind everything there's some bad people. And man, we're on YouTube. Glad I remembered that. There are things going on right now that you can get for free that are not necessarily the best thing in the world for you, and that I personally,
I understand.
My opinion falls into this thing that was very popular at the beginning of the 20th century, known as eugenics. And if I use enough buzzwords without saying it, hopefully people will figure out what the hell I'm talking about, and they'll be able to figure it out for themselves.
Well, I got it.
Yeah. In fact, I remember
I would tell you in detail what exactly I think is going on.
At the turn of the 20th century, there was hotly contested debate over that same Pharmakeia topic. And there's actually books being written. There was people coming out protesting against the introduction of these serums that they were calling snake oil and poison, straight up, just calling them poisons. And I think that's still a apt description, in my opinion. I actually have I have the axe damage. Axe minus the V damage on my arm from when I took a booster when I was a young kid, and I was like partially paralyzed for a while on my upper half of my body, my arm, and it left kind of like this blood scar on my right bicep. And so
the boosters are good for you, boys and girls.
Right, that's right. And we're talking about booster seats that you put underneath kids at pizza Hut, in the pizza
right
with the tablecloth that looks like Marlowe's.
Doesn't it suck that we have to do this?
Oh my god, I got used to Rockfin where I would just say whatever the hell I wanted.
Yeah, this is crazy. It is crazy, but these are the times we live in, and it's crazy,
exactly.
So to answer that first question that was asked about 10 minutes ago, which was, I think Marlo may have asked me, Mike may have asked me about, what do I feel is America part of Babylon, or is America the Babylon mentioned Revelation? And
I just wanted to know, because I don't think America is Babylon. No. I just want to know, like, where is America in this scenario? You know what I mean? Because
I think
this is a giant experiment that took place. You know what I'm saying?
They call it
a giant experiment.
Yeah. As far as I understood, it's intended to be the phoenix that gets destroyed and rebirthed. So they have long-standing plans for this. And I, people always ask me on my channel, do you think, like Jason just asked at the very beginning of the show, do you think we're in Revelation right now? And I always tell people, I think at least another 50 to 70 years, because of the things I see in Scripture mentioned, and then because of the way I look at society as much as I can through the filter of media to see what's out there, what's prominent in the culture. And I don't base it off of, because I don't base it off of how much technology has been presented to the mainstream culture. I base it off of the mainstream culture's behavior, because to me, that's the indicator Yeshua told us to look for, the lawlessness, that people's hearts will go cold as a result. So regardless of how much technology is, I think they've always had advanced tech, by the way, if you see my Investigating Babylon series.
Absolutely.
And so I don't think that's our barometer. I think a lot of people like to use the trend, even though I fully talk about transhumanism and all its advancements or quote unquote advancements, all its deceptive news press releases about what they're so-called doing. And what they claim they can achieve. I don't think that's a red herring, if you will, because it's more about degradation of the culture so they can then receive the deception that's coming, because they don't have any actual moral fiber to stand on. And so they're easily deceived, right?
That's what Albert Pike wrote that in his how the Third World War, I guess, is supposed to be initiated. That's exactly how he said it was supposed to be initiated. Albert Pike is supposed to be like the Freemason of Freemasons, and he's the guy that in the 1800s, I guess, wrote how the two world war. But yeah, so on his Third World War, which is supposed to be the last thing, it's exactly what you said. Like society gets so degraded through, I believe he said,
the introduction of atheism. Yeah,
and a war between the Islamic State and Zionism destroys itself. Christianity gets destroyed, and they all accept the Lucifer doctrine idea.
I think the technology being in the hands of the elite all this time is different in comparison to when it was given into the hands of the profane, of the masses, because that's what has corrupted morality, in my opinion. Like at least a high percentage of the degradation of morality within society is due to technology.
Are you sure? Well, let me think about that.
I would say so.
Because I mean, it
allows for propagation of ideas. It allows for.
Wouldn't it be about the user though? I mean, as opposed to like instead of a blanket on all members of the mankind with technology, because like I'm using technology right now. It's my dedicated purpose every day to get out the gospel of the kingdom of God, to share the hope of the resurrection with people. I use both my tablet, my cell phone, the lights, the camera. So I mean, I do hear what you're saying. It definitely expedites with the wrong push, because we see the media twists for the push of technology to not only, and this is my opinion, but they're using the technology to enclose the trap further, but also to get people addicted to it, get them further distracted, so they don't see the spider web closing in. Yep. But there are people out there that are trying to use technology for the good. I mean, I'm literally a part of Lighthouse.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying the technology is evil and that it's actually the computer that corrupts. It's the fact that these ideals are so easily transmitted through it, and that's why you have TikTok and you have all of these millions of young females out there just degrading themselves and like being filled with vanity and the men on the other hand filled with lust. And then you have and then the ideas that are pushed through it. You know what I'm saying? The propaganda.
When I was younger, before TikTok, because I'm an old dude, I'm probably the oldest guy on this panel. So I went to a Hooters when I was in Bible college, and I went to a Hooters one night and took my Bible in with me, and ordered my food and set the Bible on the table and started reading it, not looking at a single girl, right? And the waitress was like, she was like disturbed, right? Because they're used to getting the attention, right? They're used to getting,
gotcha.
They're trying to play up for that tip, and and they're watching just dudes gawking the whole time, right? But I'm just sitting there reading that Bible, and that turned into like an hour and a half conversation of this girl sitting down with me and reading the Bible with me.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, she's in her Hooters outfit, right? But I didn't care. I mean, I'm not saying I was impervious to, an attractive woman. I'm just saying, like, it was like, I'm ornery like that. Like, I do experiments intentionally like that. And that was an experiment for me, was like, what would happen instead of giving them what they're used to? What happens if I just go in there and start reading the Bible?
That's deep.
Yeah.
Was she a Christian?
She had she had left, moved out of her family's house, or she had grown up Christian. But what I noticed, and this is one of the, not this specific story, but this general premise of what I'm about to say about this girl, is what led me to, one of the reasons to start my channel, which is this girl just had questions that her parents could never answer. And even though she was raised in a Christian family, she had a good heart. She wanted to believe, right? Obviously, like Mike is talking about, she's caught up in the deceptions of this world and what the world's telling her she needs to go put on these short shorts and do hula hoops in the middle of Hooters and get tips. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, when it came to having a real conversation with her about the Bible, she was interested, and she just had basic questions, and it was like, what would happen if those basic questions got answered before she got hired at Hooters? Would she even apply? So I do agree on a definitely on a cultural rot level, Mike, that technology can expedite that cultural rot for sure. If it's pointed like a gun.
Yeah, it's like the teachings of the Watchers, right? A lot of
I
the
was
things that they taught in Enoch, right, are default, like benign,
right?
Isn't that the word, right? That they don't have really one way or the other, but they can be used either way for great catastrophe or good.
Yeah, it can. Now it seems like 1 talks about the Watchers that they intentionally were trying to use these tools to trick mankind, deceive mankind. And then once they had their children, then they taught the same practices to their children. Then their children were starting to be worshipped as gods, which the Greeks referred to as the demigods. And then they became brutal, authoritarian, and enslaving. You know what I'm saying?
Don't get me wrong. They definitely had malicious intent with their teaching.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I didn't think you were. I was just kind of going through the thoughts as well as my head, is because it's like, it's the same enemy, because Azazel was that only angel that didn't get locked up in Enoch, and he's still out after the flood. So then it shouldn't surprise us that we see those same deceptions being perpetrated after the flood as well, and it gets centralized with this emerging new one world, one nation, one tribe, whatever you want to call it, thing of Babylon that got started a couple hundred years after the flood. Which I think is interesting. Like I've tried to show my Babylon series, like they were already worshiping Jupiter. The priests of Jupiter showed up at Babylon to help build the city and the tower. So it's like they already had their false religions established, which was what Noah talks about in Jubilees chapter 10. Like the unclean spirits were already deceiving his sons and grandsons and causing them to walk in lawlessness and unrighteousness. And a part of that was picking up the ways of the Watchers, which was idolatry and human sacrifice and, incantations and charms and enchantments and things like that. So, and all the things that go with it, which some of those things are a little more subtle than others. Like, okay, so you guys know that we see, because Revelation 17:18 talks about the sorcery and the witchcraft of Babylon. So, like in stereotypical movie or TV show, you see them doing, they'll do a spell, right? And they'll do something and it looks very obvious. And they have to go through a ceremony and arrange some things in the right way on the floor and speak these right words. And that's that. I don't know magic. I don't study or practice it, but that seems to be the showman stuff. You know what I mean? That seems to be
on what it is.
Yeah, I agree, Jason. Yeah,
some of it is intent, and
the severity of what. But it seems like
I'm not into it either, but I've looked at a lot of it.
Okay, but when I look at our media today, and I look at the deceptions being perpetrated over multiple countries, I see a deeper, more subtle form of magic being employed. And I know Owen Benjamin talks about this a lot, right? But it's this idea of just it's not openly trying to throw some sort of chopped up hare and pig that's been cooked,
right,
and throw some kind of potion on you while they say some sort of incantation, but more like it's just a slow, continual progression of deception that's being fed to you in a way that you receive, and it's like this subtle form of magic that is Disney, basically.
That reminds me also, because there's a lot of brothers and sisters in the community who, if you take a painkiller, you're worshiping Satan, because that's Pharmakeia. And I wanted to ask the panel today, okay, so where do you guys stand with the idea of Pharmakeia? Because one of the arguments from a lot of people in the Torah community would be, well, any pharmaceutical grade medicine is part of this Babylonian deception and spell. It comes across as medicine, on the surface, but really what it is sorcery. So where do you guys stand with things like that?
Real quick before we jump into this answer. Hi, Rose is here tonight watching. Welcome, Rose. She's asking. She says she's scared of the word Azazel because we used that earlier. Remember, you guys remember that movie with Denzel Washington, Fallen, where the demon would jump from person to person?
Oh no, I didn't see that.
Yeah, it was like late 90s.
Well, Azazel is one of the angels of the Book of Enoch, but you probably know more than I do about that. I just know where it comes from.
Yeah, Rose. Just the angel is one of the characters in Enoch that is. He's the one that I think in chapter 9 that the creator says ascribe all sin to Azazel, and he's going to get a different punishment than the other 200 because he didn't actually take a wife and start having Nephilim babies. So he's the one that didn't get locked up forever. His judgment was proclaimed, but we don't see that actually carried out until Revelation chapter 20, verse 1, when Messiah returns and the kingdom begins on the earth. So this is why throughout the rest of Scripture, from Genesis 6 all the way to Revelation 20, we have the Satan character is the one that's called Azazel, and he's the one that's still, as 2 Peter says, he's still out roaming like a lion, seeking whom he may devour. And he's the one in Revelation 12:17 that is making war against those who keep the commandments of God and the testimony of Jesus Christ. So by the way, that movie is super fake. Demons don't jump to people that quickly and that fast, so I wouldn't be worried or scared about that. But ultimately, so go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, Azazel is also the leader of the unclean spirits in Noah's day, right? The unclean spirits were messing with the sons, basically, corrupting them, causing them pain and leading them astray and all kinds of things. But they also cause disease. And I think in the book of Jubilees, there is a book that was given from the angels. No, actually from Azazel, I believe, by request of Noah to Yah. He asked for how to combat these unclean spirits and these diseases. And Yah made Azazel write down a book and give him. Oh, well, it was the Satan, though, wasn't it?
No, the Watchers. The one narrating the book of Jubilees is the one who gives him the book of medicines to counteract the diseases of the unclean spirits.
So it was an angel that gave the book to him?
Yeah, it's the angel that's narrating the book of Jubilees.
Okay, right. Well, it was a righteous angel anyways. But he gave a book of medicine to combat the diseases of the unclean spirits. So, and that goes back to Marlo about the medicine. Where do we stand on that? I would say that medicine is good, but obviously medicine has become corrupted in some forms. If you watch the commercials on TV about all the side effects these things are having, so but like penicillin. Penicillin is a naturally occurring antibiotic, right? And it saves millions of lives. So I would say that penicillin is a great thing, right?
It's noteworthy to mention here that in that book of medicines you were just referring to, it was so that he might heal them with the herbs of the earth, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, not
whatever, yeah. Those things.
not a spike protein or not a mRNA manipulation, but simply just the herbs of the earth. And that's what people are actually finding in the last 6 to 12 months. They're just finding natural ways to combat the things they're being lied about too. So yeah, that's that. I'm sorry, Marla, what was your full question again? I apologize.
It's kind of touched on, right? Because depending on how should I say, depending on how sticking to the text your perspective is, right? Like, okay, I'm only going to use herbs for my diseases and whatnot.
Spagyrics is actually the medicine of herbal extraction and making medicines just from that. About as far from Pharmakeia as you could possibly be.
What can you repeat that? Because I didn't hear what you.
Spagyrics, also known as the alchemy of the plant world, but it is the way of taking herbs. Like if someone was trying to make extracts or tinctures or things like that, purely from Mother Earth to help cure or help the body or something like that, the general term for it is called spagyrics. I know a couple people who do phenomenal jobs of doing things, and they do indeed do Amazing.
Thanks for that information.
That's a made up word.
So I'm a very strong proponent of, you know, proper diet, getting preservatives and all the bad stuff out of your diet, because I do believe that a lot of the ailments that we experience are because of how we eat, the toxins in the air and whatnot. And so there's a variety of ways, right? But however, I still deal with that kickback, right? Of, well, what if a brother has a mental illness, or what if a brother has, you know, or brother or sister has anxiety issues and they're on Zoloft or something like that, right? Well, depending on who you're dealing with, you know, your subsequent impending response might be something like, you know, any pill that's an herb, not an herb, is Pharmakeia. How accurate do you think that a statement like that is? Do you think that, because I do believe that the medical industrial complex is clearly corrupted. How corrupted though? Is it that corrupted that every single thing that they might prescribe somebody would be considered pharmakeas?
For the most part, yes. That doesn't mean that there aren't things out there that can help. Like, but the predominance of what the pharmaceutical industry does, and I'm trying to say this carefully since we're just on YouTube, the predominance of what they do is treat symptoms, not cure diseases. If you cure a disease, you no longer have a customer. And that's not the order of the day, is it? So.
And Marlo, it's also maybe depending on what state you're in, because if you're in Colorado, you may have a doctor that says, "Oh, go down to Livewell and get you some of that good green," and then you may not need a Xanax.
But hey, the good green though, the good green for epilepsy. Like, I've heard so many stories about CBD oil on people who are epileptic and like shutting down seizures in children. So like, and that goes back to this, you know, healing with the herbs. I'm not saying go out and toke it up, you know, until you can't see straight. But I'm saying
I've interviewed the man whose name is attached to a lot of the oil and all that, and his name is Rick Simpson. I interviewed him years ago, and yeah, that's exactly it. These things can do wondrous things if done properly. It's not for the point of just having a good time hanging out with your friends. The whole point is that
my problem is I can't have even a little bit, or I'm done for days. So like, I can't even, if I was prescribed
even medicinally though, you have to deal with that. Like, you might have, for instance, a friend of ours who administers this a lot. He's in Michigan. His wife was going to die, and she didn't like the high from it, but it was literally like, do you want to die or do you want to do this? So he stayed with her while she was being administered the oil until she got through it. And guess what? She's still alive today. That was years ago. So
my goodness, like,
it is what it is.
I could, like, you know how in movies they give people like more morphine so they die peacefully.
Oh yeah.
Like if they're in a war zone or whatever. I just need someone just to lean over and blow some weed smoke in my face as I'm dying. And I'm gonna fly away. as my soul flies away.
Oh man.
Like, I'm such a lightweight. It's crazy. What's up? Let's play this. What were you saying?
I didn't say anything. I'm just wondering where this conversation is going.
No, because we're talking about the sorceries. We're talking about the Pharmakeia and the sorceries of Babylon. And the question is okay, well, is it going to be something really, really blatant where everybody's standing outside with a Ouija board and everybody's doing that? Or is it something subtle, right? And so one of the questions that I've always had, because I've seen this come up in different Torah observant Facebook groups, is what are the parameters of Pharmakeia, right? I also wouldn't put it past the food industry, right? We know
they're kind of intertwined to a degree.
The first thing that comes to my mind is that if an ingredient or substance has a long list of negative, severe side effects, potentially even,
that in and of itself,
a good indication.
If it has a long list to begin with, that's probably not food.
Yeah, it's a good indication that that's not real medicine, you know,
or food.
Yeah,
or food. Yeah, both. Now let's be real for a second. The what's going on right now is partially and a whole lot to do with the pharmaceutical industry, because they're making bank right now. And I'm trying to, again, watch my words, how I say this. But how many people do you see walking around with things on their faces? This is the pharmaceutical industry and an extension of that, casting a spell over pretty much the entire world. And the people who have given in to said problem are having worse problems a lot of times, because we get a lot of people from the inside in the medical industry who report to us what's really going on. And I assure you, there's a lot more problems than are being let on about. I think that's
just for the viewer. Right? I just want to put this on screen, guys. We are talking about Revelation right now because we have on screen, this is that famous verse in Revelation 18:23, that at the end of this verse, for the merchants were the great ones of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by your sorcery. Your being pointing back to the idea of Babylon being spoken to in this passage, in this whole chapter, actually. But the idea is, if we look up this word sorcery in the Greek, this is where people have realized that it actually is the use of the word at the very bottom here, pharmakeia. So this is the idea that people, it's not just, again, we're not, like I was saying, it's not like this, Bewitched from the 1960s where someone's like twinkling a little bell sound and they're doing some sort of spinning a circle and casting a spell on you. That's not the kind of sorcery. We're talking about a more subtle form of sorcery that's called pharmakeia. And
can you click it and open up the word?
And so when you look at this word and its definition, it's the use of medicine, drugs, or spells, and they're intimately connected. And so this is where how do we get this information out to more people, that taking a manipulation of these drug concepts, even if they're FDA approved, it's just going to further put you into their control. This is literally why in that passage it says the nations were deceived by your deception, but that they were deceived with deception of this type of sorcery. So it makes sense because, like I've tried to talk about in my Investigate Babylon series, that some of the practices of Babylon have been consistent since way back. And one of those practices was at these temples that worship Baal and Moloch and all these other gods, there was alcohol and drug use involved. It was a part of the partying. And it was actually a part of the carousing, which in the book of Exodus, chapter 32, it is the word in the Hebrew that's generically translated for the word play. Like when they built the calf, the molten calf, and they were worshiping it at the base of the mountain, and Moses runs down there. And then Moses is told, hey, they built a calf, there's sacrifice to it. And, the people had their feast, and then they got up to play. Where you look up that Hebrew word, it's the word carousing, so sexually carousing. Because this was a part of these feasts, was to get drunk. Other drugs were involved. There was mass fornication that would start to happen. And that was in addition to the sacrifices that had either had taken place or about to take place. So it was... all these practices are synonymous with worshiping and being deceived by the practices of Babylon. And I'm using this Babylon term like over encompassing. Obviously, right. Like we talked about earlier, it came from the Watchers, these rebellious group of angels that were initially, they were sent to the earth to help mankind. That's the crazy part. Jubilees 4:15 tells you that they were sent to the earth to actually teach mankind right behavior. But then when they got here, they saw some shorties, and they were like, "Hey, this look pretty good. Look at this girl." And then they were like, "Okay." So they started abusing their position, and then took wives, had children, and then Wes Plays and I kind of jokingly theorized: is it possible that they, once they fell into their sin and their transgression of their righteous behavior as angels, which what they were supposed to be, they then were like, "All right, well, let's just get all of mankind to join in our behavior, and maybe our punishment will be less if we like deceive all these people and get them to do it with us." You know what I mean? So because they like the Bible describes this idea that the angels are like a priesthood, they are a priesthood, and they're sent to the earth to help mankind learn right behavior. So like, and in the Bible's eyes, mankind is the focus of all of creation. All these heavenly angels and the multiple layers of the firmament above us were created on day one with the focus of us. Like they're ministering servants. Yeah, ministering servants to come help us do what's right. We're little brother that's being trained up, and older brother abused his position, stole our girlfriend, and started corrupting little brother. You know what I mean? So it's like it's horrible what happened. And so but when I go after the flood, after those angels were locked up and Azazel's young one left out, he gets control over these unclean spirits and starts deceiving mankind after the flood. Well, that all converged in this really epic moment called, the building of the city and the Tower of Babel, where it became kind of like a centralized empire for the first time, ruling over many different families at the time. So I don't know if they were technically tribes yet, or, I don't want to get into the semantics of that word, but if they were ruling over many different families, and only after that event, when Babylon was destroyed by the judgment of God, were those families then speaking different languages and then became individualized nations. So when that happened, Babylon didn't lose control. And this is the part that I think a lot of people don't realize. It wasn't like, oh, okay, so we're gonna stop now. We're just gonna go do something else. No, they kept control. They just went to different nations and different languages. They put on different outfits to appeal to different people groups, and they continued the same practices throughout all these nations. And just like today, right? Just like you see the same practices of communist Russia happening in China and Vietnam, South American countries being as pushed on America as hard as possible in the last 30 years, because it's the same practices of a political system, which is actually also Babylonian, of suppression and subjugation that is shared by multiple countries, right? And so in a similar sense, this is where this empire of Babylon, like we see all the ways up into the days of Daniel, ruling over 127 different provinces. Guys, that's huge.
I know.
It's not saying like this little country just west of Israel that was called Assyria had 127 different segregated provinces in it. No, it's talking about other nations. So I'm sorry, go ahead, West Place.
Oh, I was just going to ask, are we to believe the modern narrative that modern Iraq is that ancient Babylon? Because what you just said, lends to the idea that that kingdom was spread through, much larger land masses than those common borders we see today. So is Iraq in modernity, is that a part of where that Babylonian empire started?
Supposedly, that's the general vicinity.
That's just what we read if you search it on Google, right?
Yeah. That's right. Can we prove that? Maybe archaeologists could do a better job of saying that,
right?
But, and that's where I would be getting that from.
Saddam Hussein was fascinated with the actual geographical location of Iraq, which is nothing anymore. It's a wasteland. And it's not really, it actually is the fulfillment of it. What's that?
Right, in scripture, yeah.
Yeah, it was prophesied to never be inhabited again. And in a general sense, it's not inhabited again. I mean, there was a palace built there by Saddam, and there's been a few people that live in the area, but it's not the great kingdom and city that it once was, whose walls were 60 feet high, having chariot races on the top of it.
There are also a lot of rumors of artifacts being removed from Iraq in the 2003-2004 era.
Yes.
That's true.
Well, is it Fallujah? A lot of people don't realize that Fallujah is ancient Nineveh in the Bible. And that's where, if you go in and you look at the Iraq War 2003-2005, you can go online, you can see soldiers who had posted pictures of them going into Fallujah, and the actual ancient gates of Nineveh with the huge lions with wings were still there. But since then, since 2011, they've all been demolished and destroyed.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, that's
because I don't want you to know history.
Facts.
Right. No, that's
facts.